I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits from giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits from giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits from giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Alright, first of all, how was it? A little easier this time? Mm-hmm. Who struggled? Okay. Struggle in which way? Keeping the object? Pardon?
Maintaining an image.
Maintaining an image, yes.
Yeah, generating this gratitude towards
someone you don't know.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, not only someone you don't know. I don't need to know somebody, but if I've heard enough about them,
yes.
then I haven't heard much about them.
Well, you will hear more about them. So just going over them again and again. Yes? Faster would be better? You're getting bored? Oh my gosh. I'm thinking the gaps are too short. You don't have enough time to visualize. Well, this is great. You've just met your own mind that wants to be entertained, right? It's kind of like to sit there and visualize something. We usually have the internet, right? Go to Google Images. Why do I need to visualize? I think it's really our inability nowadays, and I'm not saying you, I'm saying our, because I include myself, to actually visualize things. We're so bombarded with all these images and so forth. This is why we don't want you to have your phones and internet. Not because we want to torture you. No, it's all about giving you this opportunity, saying, well, this is the time, try not to be distracted, to be free from distractions, and just give it a try. Okay, it's only 10 days, come on, it's not going to kill us, right? I'm saying in general. So taking away your phones, your ability to check online, and you'll feel after a while your mental capacity just increases. It's not about becoming a Buddhist, right? It's not even recommended to become one. It's about tapping into your mental capacity that lies untapped right now. And especially at this day and age, with all these little tools, our mental capacity is degenerating more and more. Our ability to concentrate, the faster the internet, the faster those movies are, right? I mean, I've said that many times, but some of you haven't heard me say that. If you watch a movie from the 40s, it's kind of like a meditation, like, I don't know, these funny movies like Hitchcock the Birds or something. Bird, just birds, right? Nowadays, you have these crime series where someone is killed within half an hour, the case is investigated and solved within half an hour, right? It's so fast now. Everything is so fast. Our mind just gets really bored. So it's really important to get back to that quietness, because a lot of suffering that we experience, the suffering is already there, but if our mind is so rapid and cannot stay on one object, the suffering is just stronger, right? We have no longer the ability to figure out what's going on in our mind. There's too much going on. We can't focus on one aspect. One problem leads to the next, etc. So I believe a lot of our 21st century problems have to do with this rapid kind of space. So I want to do it slowly and just get your mind to, right? And when you lose it, you gently bring it back. You know, like a dog on a leash or something. You want to discipline the dog, so you gently bring it back. So sorry, which reminds me also, please come to all the meditations, okay? Please be all part. This is all giving you this unique experience, this unique opportunity to do it together as a group, out of consideration for others, okay? So those of you who have not come so far, please make a point. Come to all the sessions. You're helping. Your participation helps everyone else as part of the group energy to stay together and do this together. Okay? All right. And not to leave the premises again. Also, don't leave the premises. Just give it a try. Great. All right. Now, back to the mind. There's a question here, but it's not the time to address this yet. Well, in a sense, okay, there's it connects to the conceptual mind, that the opposite of not vas is a permanent phenomenon, so it's not perceived by a direct perceiver. It is perceived by a direct perceiver, absolutely. Just not by way of appearing. Okay, so there's a difference. This is a question with regard to something that is permanent. What does the sense consciousness perceive? Now, our sense consciousnesses, we speak of an explicit apprehension or perception and an implicit one. Explicit and implicit. Now, what does that mean, explicit, implicit? Those are just words, again, taken from the English language. But explicit means by way of the thing appearing to the mind. Okay, when you have an object, when it appears and you apprehend it, it's an explicit apprehension. It appears, the object appears, such as the vase, okay, or the table. When you perceive this table, the eye consciousness perceiving the table apprehends the table explicitly, in that the table appears to the mind, and the mind knows table. Okay? But it implicitly, without the object having to appear, it implicitly also knows not table, or the opposite of not table. Why? Because knowing table means you're able to discern, you're able to distinguish the table from anything that is not a table. If you weren't able to do that, then when you look at the table and the things surrounding the table, you wouldn't be able to say this far, that's the table, and that is what is next to the table. That's a chair, that's a tripod, and so forth. Does that make sense? All right. So in that sense, just the fact, and we talk more about being able to discern, distinguish, what mental factor does that, in more details on that. But just in general, this table here, we know it's a table, therefore we know what is not a table. Okay? We know what is not a table, or what in the surrounding area is not the object we're looking at. We can distinguish it. So we know the opposite from not table. So we can negate, our mind negates not table. Right? Okay. It's a little odd. This takes some getting used to. It seems like our eye consciousness can do all that. But give the eye consciousness more credit. I mean, it's not just like we have a sense, it's just the eye. Okay? The eyes. But that's the eye sense power. We're not saying the eye sense power knows anything. It doesn't know anything. It just serves as a kind of mirror. The eye sense power, we say things appear to it, to the retina, etc. So in the same way as science explains it, there's no contradiction there. Buddhists don't explain this very sophisticated process of the retina and how the image is upside down. The whole explanation. That is not given in the Buddhist scriptures. But it supports that. It's saying whatever happens on a physical level happens. So there's the sense power, which includes the brain, the part of the brain that is responsible for seeing something. Of course, the eye, the optical nerve, and so forth. It's all included in the eye sense power. And it does its thing, but it doesn't perceive anything. The eyes don't see anything. They don't perceive. They don't apprehend. They don't know. They only see. Okay? They don't see. They only have something appear to it. There's no active knowing. From a Buddhist point of view, the physical aspect cannot experience. But then you have an experiencing entity, and that is the eye consciousness. Now that has whatever the eye sense power passed on, basically, that appears to it, or in dependence on what the eye sense power did, in dependence on that, something appears. in this case the table, plus the mind apprehends it. It apprehends table. All right? So explicitly, in the sense it appears, the table appears. It knows table explicitly because the table appears and then knows the table. There's some things that appear that the mind doesn't know, the subtle particles that are in the sphere of vision of that eye consciousness. And there are things that it implicitly knows without it appearing, which is the opposite from not table. Or not table, however you want to express it. So it's not like it knows those words. We have to use words here. It's what is meant with not table. That's what it knows implicitly. Because of course, those two, table and not table, they're directly contradictory. If two things are directly contradictory, if you know one, you refute the other. If you know one, you negate the other. Automatically. Our mind does that automatically. If two things are direct opposites, not just contradictory, but like direct opposites, then it's just a natural ability of our mind. When you perceive, for instance, vase, you naturally negate the opposite, that is not vase. Okay? But that takes a little bit getting used to. It totally makes sense to us in everyday life, but even our mind has that ability. If the mind cannot negate not table, it won't be able to perceive table. How would it perceive table if it didn't know what is not table? To know something, you know what it means to not be that thing. Does that make sense? Yeah. So the mind actually has that ability. Clarification, you raised your hand, kind of like, and it went down again.
I mean, okay, there is table, and there is around the table is not table.
Yes.
How we are going to use this perception for that? I mean, which mind quality we will understand to knowing that things.
All right. This is more than a clarification. Do you mind if we address it? So during the question answer time, you check the ask again. Clarification?
Eye consciousness works with mental consciousness.
Eye consciousness works with mental consciousness. Do they work with one another? Yes, they do.
First one, then another.
Pardon?
First one, then another.
Yes, they don't work simultaneously, but of course we all know when you see, first you perceive a table, right? And then once you know table with your eye consciousness, then your mental consciousness right away takes over. So it registers, if you like, with the mental consciousness, with the conceptual mind. It always does. So you perceive it with your eye consciousness, and then it gives rise right away to a mental consciousness. And it may just register the same object, as in like identify the same object mentally and leave it at that, or you may start thinking about it, give it some thought. Well, what is this table? Was that there yesterday or not? What is the color, etc.? Start reflecting on it. It depends. Okay? Yes?
Clarification. The labeling part, when we perceive a table, the labeling is in by mental consciousness or eye consciousness?
Okay. The eye consciousness does not label. So the question is, does the eye consciousness label, or when does the labeling take place? What is labeling anyway? Labeling, okay, we'll come to this more, but maybe I say it right away, because then things make more sense.
Isn't the labeling part the intellectual and experimental?
The labeling part is the thought, it is this.
Yeah.
That's labeling.
Either we know it from how we've experienced it before.
Right. So so labeling, we have this sense like labeling is applying the term. That is very coarse labeling. When we, for instance, are children, we see an object, right? Initially, we label it some way. It's in some way in which we are capable to do. You remember we talked about we are not born with a blank mind that doesn't have any concepts. There's certain concepts. That doesn't mean you need to have language. I mean, even though before you know the word for something, you can think about it, right? We all have that experience. We see something, we have no idea what it's called, but we use imagery, we use other symbols that enable us to get at that. And we talk about these symbols as we go along. So what I'm trying to say is that the moment we think, it's this, all right? It's this. That is labeling, right? And we do that all the time. We keep labeling all day long. We keep labeling all day long. And what is so fascinating is that we do that with the I all the time. We think, I am like this, I am like that. So, from a Buddhist point of view, there is no separate I. There's merely a collage of different thoughts. I'm like this, I'm like that, I'm like this, I'm like that. Have you ever noticed? People tell you something, they tell you, oh, you're great, you're wonderful. You go, oh, piece of the collage. I'm great, I'm wonderful. And then someone down in the market says, you're an idiot. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, a little bit. So you add that, right? I'm kind of running in front of a car, the car almost, hits me. I was stupid to do that. So I think, oh God, I'm an idiot, not attentive, right? So all day long, our sense of I is reinforced all the time. I'm like this, I'm like that. Through external sense perception, hearing things, seeing things. You look in the mirror. Oh, look good or not, or tired or not, right? So looking into that, looking at photographs, sense of I. The expression of other people when they see you, versus right? So all that, because we're so much involved, so much around the I, it keeps adding thoughts. Okay, so the sense perception, the way I just described, just no judgment, nothing. And then there's a conceptual mind. It's like this, it's like that. And there you have your sense of an I. And if someone tells you often enough you're not worth anything, well, the problem is we believe them. And then we act accordingly. Isn't that bizarre? Right? Cannot do anything. Then we lack confidence. So we're told these things. So if we understand that process, that our sense of I is not that we think I am like that because I is like that. No. We are like this, like that, and so forth because we think we are. Can you see the incredible freedom in that? You can think, I can do anything. Right? That's what you do in tantric practice. When you're ready to do tantric practice, you're basically visualizing you're an enlightened being. And that speeds up the process because there's nothing I cannot do. I'm this compassionate, wise being. Of course we're not. But through the power of our mind, and because we have all the ingredients to be the special being, everything is right there. We just need to tap into it and remove what's in the way to doing so. That's why we can actually do it. We can speed up that process. So that's an incredible freedom. And we are the ones who limit ourselves. It's not our parents. Right? It's not our parents. Yes, they've contributed. But we're not stuck in what our parents tell us. And that's like that many years ago, whatever, or other people told us. Our problem is we keep rewinding it. What did they say? They said so-and-so. It's long gone what they've said. We don't even know why they said it. Whatever was the reason, they maybe didn't mean it, or they were wrong about it, whatever. And we choose to believe it, we hold on to it, we rewind it, we go over and over it again. So it's no longer what our parents tell us, it's us repeating it over and over. I'm just taking that as an example. So you have to let it go. Let it go. Look at yourself again and see. You see, look at your strength. Look at your strength. This is one of the first topics in Buddhism. The first topic. Your precious human rebirth. Now, you may do it the way it's described in the scriptures, but you can expand on it. Most of the meditators, when you talk to the meditators, they take those as some kind of guidelines and then take it from there and bring in their own ideas how they do a meditation. So on precious human rebirth, while saying, wow, we have this incredible body right now, this incredible opportunity, plus I can do this, I'm good at that, I'm good at... Make a list. Right? If you feel kind of like you're lacking self-confidence and there's a sense of self-worth missing, and we all have that. We were born in the West. Come on, it's Western culture that emphasizes that, right? There's a lot of pressure on us to be perfect. I hate that word. Not even the Buddha is perfect. Why is the Buddha not perfect? Because he's restricted in what he can do. Can't take our suffering. He's not omnipotent. So the Buddha, I wouldn't call that perfect, but he's reached a state that's the best you can reach with the kind of mind we all have right now. We have that mind. We have that mind a Buddha has too, except we cannot fully utilize it. So, therefore, to recognize in the West these ideas of be the perfect housewife, use Ariel or something, right? These commercials. I mean, it's bizarre. I watch commercials when I go home, and I'm fascinated by how sophisticated they are. I try to pay attention. You know, like the car kind of commercials, right? It's like you're driving this empty area, like it's all empty space. Empty roads, beautiful wife, a woman next to you, right? You look really incredibly stylish, you're so cool. It's like an ever-present sunset that you're driving into. The ocean on this side, the green on the other. It's kind of like, it totally suggests that this is what your life is going to be like. That's a cool person. It's amazing. I mean, modern advertising is very sophisticated. So, I have the deepest respect of this psychology. There's this, what is it called? Suggestive, kind of. There's a word for that. It's kind of suggesting certain things. So, understanding is the first step to not being driven by it. Try to understand it, look through it. And in the end, we're all driven by it. Subconsciously, it pulls us in that direction, telling us what is the right thing to do. If you don't, like watching movies, it's like if you don't have a partner, you're kind of incomplete and stuff. Because there's always some love affair going on, right? That's how people feel really incomplete if they don't have a lover. Why are we not incomplete? Come on, ask thousands of monks and nuns, they feel very complete. It's not wrong to have a relationship. I'm not saying that. It's great. It really helps you to grow, etc. And there's even a little bit of celibacy involved. Because you can only be with that person. So you're celibate plus one. So it's not, right? It's actually so it's actually great. I mean, it is definitely. But before we're actually in that relationship, right? Before we're even in that relationship, it is. There's a sense like I'm not complete. I need someone. You know, the sense of incompleteness and always looking for someone and maybe second best because you can't find anyone who suits me. I mean, all these dating sites, why are they so successful? Because we're under the impression, and it's lovely, it's good to have a relationship. No one needs to be celibate to be a Buddhist practitioner and so forth. All I'm saying, we think we have so much freedom. And we do in a certain sense in the West. But at the same time, we are slaves of the suggestions of those advertisements, those movies, etc. So it's just recognizing, oh, that's what they're suggesting, but this doesn't make sense. And then just suggesting it because a movie without a little bit of love here and there is kind of boring, so they add that. That's the only reason. It's not that you're incomplete unless you have another person. And then when you meet the right person, great. But this feeling like, oh, something is missing and feeling miserable, that's just waste of energy. Okay? So this is why also in Buddhism there's a lot more emphasis on not outwards. What do others tell us? What do movies tell us? What does advertisement tell us? All these things around you, but moving inwards. And even monks and nuns, we are supposed to walk around, not like, but focused. Supposed to actually walk, look at the ground, not be too distracted, and to be mindful. Right? So in the West, there's so much around us. I mean, it's kind of, okay, it's not like Central Square in New York. I mean, that is really like Central Park. Times Square. Like, flashy. It's not like that. But walking around in the West, nonetheless, it's pretty much, it's very destructive. So here you learn this kind of looking inwards, not talking, not going outside, to keep your mind focused. And hopefully you bring this back with you and try to apply this a little bit to your everyday life. Right? When you walk in town, what are my thoughts? What am I thinking? Etc. Just for your self-worth. It's incredible how much we suffer from low self-esteem, from self-hatred. It's terrible. The Tibetans just don't have that. They don't have a word for self-hatred. There's this famous story, you probably heard about it, when the Dalai Lama was discussing with, His Holiness was discussing with scientists, and self-hatred came up, and His Holiness was like, what is that? And so he kind of had his translator who'd lived abroad for long enough, they took a time out for 10 minutes, and the translator explained to His Holiness what self-hatred was. Because His Holiness had not heard about it. Because they don't have it. Tibetans, they may have, I can't do this, I can't do that, no, I'm not sure. They have that, but it's not low self-confidence. They're very confident, very sure in themselves. They're not insecure. They say what they think, and they're very certain in their mental state. So all I'm saying is ours is not natural, and we need to work. We need to do something about it. It's so important to bring up our self-confidence, to be happy with who we are. Okay? I'll say more about this, but I usually say at some point, because as Westerners, and I'm saying Indians are just like Westerners, because it's the same lifestyle now. Okay? The modern lifestyle in India, well, it's the same. And Tibetans also have that lifestyle now, but it's still, the whole culture is so deeply influenced by Buddhism that even young people, this lack of self-confidence, no, I haven't come across it. I came across one Tibetan who had it, but he was raised in a Tibetan children village in Switzerland, some kind of, it wasn't even a Tibetan children. It was like these kids without parents. They were sent to Switzerland, and they grew up without kids, and he was just raised in the Western context, so he was definitely lacking it, and it was so bizarre talking to him, because he was Tibetan, he looked Tibetan, he spoke really good Tibetan, because he had learned it in the meantime, and he behaved so differently. He was just like an insecure Westerner, like all of us. No, I'm not saying we're all insecure and all that, but he was quite young at the time. It's like the younger you are, the more it may come through. But all I'm saying, the Tibetans really have this stability, and it is the Western way of life. It puts a lot of pressure on us, and we feel we're not adequate. Okay, and that is not true. That is not true. Okay, each one of us is so amazing, right? And of course we have our shortcomings, but they're only temporary. They can be removed, and we have this incredible wealth of qualities that we just haven't tapped into. Okay, anyway, just on that note, but going back to sense perception, so I already gave you a sense, where does our sense of I come in here? And how the sense perception, of course, are very important, because they're the input from the outside world. So how does that work? Well, by way of an appearing object and an object of apprehension. Things that appear, things that don't appear, we apprehend them. Things that both appear and are both apprehended. Right? So in that way, it's a little complicated, but after a while, you hear it often enough, it becomes second nature. All right. Where did we get to last time?
Page 5.
Page 5, yes.
That's whatever is.
Okay, whatever is impermanent. So here I've kind of gone away from the mind and the object. I explained permanent and impermanent, just because usually in the West we get a little bit confused, or as non-Buddhists basically, or not being used to the Buddhist system of the idea of permanence and impermanence, we get a little bit confused about eternal versus static, etc. So here doesn't mean eternal, non-eternal, permanent and impermanent. It means static or not static. All right. So therefore, whatever is impermanent is necessarily a phenomenon that changes moment by moment, whereas whatever is permanent is necessarily a phenomenon that does not change moment by moment. Okay. Now, going back to here, the appearing object, from what we've heard so far, only something that is impermanent can appear to a sense consciousness. In terms of appearance, only something that is impermanent, not an abstract, can appear. Yeah.
Is a clarification.
Yes.
You've used sense, power, consciousness. Are they interchangeable? Are they different?
They're different. Okay. Yes. No. We'll speak about this distinction between sense consciousness versus sense power. But I might as well clarify it now. Sense power, it's the Tibetan word wangpo. It's called wangpo. Wang means power. Okay? Wangpo can mean lord, can mean power. It's a dominant condition that gives rise to the sense consciousness. So sense power is whatever is necessary on a physical level to give rise to a sense consciousness. So in the case of an eye consciousness, as I said before, the eyeball, the optical nerve, the visual cortex, all these parts of the brain and of the eye itself, all these that are necessary, that are physical, necessary to give rise to an eye consciousness are called sense power. The Tibetans kind of describe it's like a very subtle thing, right? But subtle in the sense it's very sophisticated. It's difficult to understand what's really happening. So there's a bit of debate on that. What is that sense power? So my sense of it is what happens on a physical level. That's the sense power. And without it, we could not have a sense consciousness. We could not have an eye consciousness without the eye, right? The eye, a fully functioning eye, an optical nerve, the visual cortex, whatever is necessary, whatever you need to have in order not to be declared blind. Okay? So, therefore, if you have all that, then you can have an eye consciousness. So that's the difference. Is that clear? And we'll speak about the process of how the object, that sense power coming together, it gives rise to a sense consciousness. That'd be part of it, yes.
How does that work in terms of the definition being a clear internal form that's the unaccompanied power condition? Like, how does that work if it's not a clear internal form? Like the brain.
What do you mean with a clear internal form? What is a clear internal form?
It's just subtle. I've had it experienced as a subtle form. And it's not the eye. Like, that was pretty...
Well, but I mean, that's like, it's really debated. I mean, that's the thing. It's a clear internal form. The thing is, I think what it means is like, it's none of those separately. It's those, like this is the definition that is classically given. Although, again, like I said, it's, you see, I'm not so sure, because the Tibetans at the time, or the Indians at the time, they had no understanding of the exact working of the sense power. It was necessary. People didn't want to know, but it didn't teach about it. So there was a sense, it can't just be the eye. Can't just be the eye, because, you know, people have fully functioning eyes and they're still blind, right? If the visual cortex is not working properly, etc. So it can't just be that. So therefore, there was a sense there must be some something subtle there that is clear and subtle. But nowadays, with modern science, it becomes harder and harder to really support that. What is that subtle thing, right? So maybe some people have suggested it's a kind of potential that we all have, and we pass on that kind of potential, which is kind of physical, I don't know, some energy. Some suggest it's like the wind energy that goes along with the mind. You have that potential. But that's really hard, so it's really difficult, so it's not that clear. I like to just use the Western explanation, just saying sense power, that's what it is. It just makes more sense. And if there's still this potential, which is the energy that comes with the mind anyway, okay, that's fine. But that doesn't explain it well enough for us, because we don't really know what that means to that extent. So I stick with the scientific one, okay? Yeah. So, but keep that in mind nonetheless. Keep researching. I've asked so many different teachers, and everyone's given me kind of a slightly different answer. Yeah. So in the end, I came up with that explanation, and I don't think it's contradictory.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Anyway, going back to this. Any clarifications? Yes?
So just want to understand the relation between labeling and exaggeration. And is there any
the way you start your question, it's not a clarification. No, I understand. You want to understand that?
I want to understand that,
yes, I get that.
Exaggeration can't be avoided, but is there an antidote or a reverse thought which perhaps you use?
No. There's no problem. We're not blaming labeling.
No,
for all our trouble.
But this has exaggeration also, right?
Oh yes. This exaggeration. Okay, that's important. You're very right. Exaggeration. We'll come to that. That we need to get into. You're so right. It's a very important aspect, but we haven't really gotten the basis down yet. So allow me to continue a little further, and then at some point we have to discuss this in more detail. You're right. That's our main problem. We are experts in exaggeration. We are experts in exaggerating, one way or another. That's why the middle way is so important, and that'll be part of our discussions. Okay. How many more days do we have? does the course end anyway?
29.
29th. Okay, today's the
21st.
21st. Oh my god, you're better than me without internet. Oh yeah, it's 21st. All right, we got 8 more days, so definitely no way that we will not address that. Okay, great. All right. Okay. Regarding the appearing object and the object of engagement of the eye consciousness apprehending vast, you see here's an example. Both the appearing object, or example means a chart, like a little diagram. So both the appearing object and the object of engagement of the eye consciousness apprehending vast, well, that's the vast. It's always a challenge with the formatting, so the vast is not in the center of the, below the arrow, but never mind. The appearing object, but not the object of engagement of the eye consciousness apprehending vast, the subtle particles of vast. And then the object of engagement, but not the appearing object, since it's permanent, is opposite of not vast. Right? Does that make sense? I know it's a little abstract initially, but think about why that is the case. Why it has to appear. Like always ask why. The table, if you specify an eye consciousness perceiving vast, here I'm saying the person is interested in perceiving the table. Right? If you have an eye consciousness perceiving a table, in that moment you're interested in seeing the table. You pay full attention to the table. Alright? It's up to us. It's up to us. What do we want to see? Our attention. What is our attention mainly focused on? Well, in this case, it's the eye consciousness. Alright, in this case, it's the table. Wanting to see the table now, its main object, that's what I'm interested in. That because I look at it, I mean, how would I put it? I turn my head in such a way that it comes into the sphere of vision of my eye sense power, or I should say my eye consciousness, right? So because I move my head, now it's right in front of me. I can now see it. Okay? Now, because it is right there, because of the sense power, what arises is an eye consciousness perceiving a table. And to that eye consciousness, because my main interest is in seeing the table, therefore my eye consciousness now perceives this table by way of the table appearing to it. Of course it appears to it. How else would I know table? If the table didn't appear to me, I couldn't perceive it with my eye consciousness. Okay? That's important. It has to appear. And it is by way of the eye sense power that enables my eye consciousness to have the table appear. And we know right now this is happening. You look at the table. Is it appearing? Is it appearing or not?
Yes.
It does. So we can all agree on that. Now, do you know, does your eye consciousness recognize table? Well, that's a little harder because we're like, is it my sense consciousness that knows table or is it my mental consciousness? That is hard for us right now to distinguish. Okay? That is, again, through meditation, we can actually come to distinguish that. This is how far my eye consciousness goes. This is how far my mental consciousness goes. We can actually learn that. So for the time being, we may choose to take it on faith or not. Kind of like be skeptical, but nonetheless, alright. So the eye consciousness has table appear to it, and table is known by the eye consciousness. Alright. But then are there things that appear to the eye consciousness that I'm not aware? Of course, plenty. Plenty. Whatever is in the sphere of vision, all the nitty-gritty details, if they didn't appear, you can't have 100 balls or 100 dots appear to you without each one of them appearing. Think of the pixels in a computer. Nowadays, you can no longer see the pixels, right? A few years ago, you could still, they were so coarse. But now you can no longer see those tiny pixels. Are they all appearing? Of course they are. We're just not aware of them. So think of it like a pixel, like when you look at this table, instead of pixels, it's those subtle atoms. They're even subtler than those pixels. So they give us they enable us to fully appear, for this table to fully appear, at least the part of the table that does appear to us. Does that make sense? So the subtle particles, they appear. And because we know table, and not table is the direct opposite of that. Knowing table, our mind automatically negates not table. So, negating not table means the same as knowing not table. Right? If you negate not table, you know not table. But that is an abstract. That is not something that, it's permanent. It's not something like a color and so forth. It's an abstract. So that is implicitly known by the mind. And there's a lot of things we implicitly know. So no surprise, just to say, no surprise that our eye consciousness has things that it knows implicitly. Right? I mean, we know things implicitly all the time. Yes, you
answered it.
I did. Great. That's quick. Yes.
Just a quick clarification. So in the case that I'm just in meditation and I'm visualizing a table, so I don't use my eye consciousness to see the table, is it still an appearing object as well as my object of engagement?
We'll come to this.
Okay.
Yes. We haven't said much about the mental consciousness because that's much more difficult to understand.
Is this suggesting that the appearing object is objective?
Is that suggesting that the appearing object is objective? Is it suggesting that? I tell you something. It sounds like that. Why? Because when the Buddha set this forth, he wasn't explaining yet subjective versus objective. He first kind of set it forth the way it appears to us. So the language sometimes seemed to suggest that, because to bring in emptiness, right, the ultimate truth, and try to explain at the same time the conventional mind, boy, that's really overwhelming. It's overwhelming enough to learn about the mind with all the details and how it works. Although we all have it, we have no idea how it works. So we're really overwhelmed initially with all the information. And then to suggest, oh my God, but it exists subjectively. That would be too much. So it's almost like the Buddha allows us to get away with objective existence initially. And you've all heard it. I mean, Ayadeva says it, for instance. Before you can understand the ultimate truth, the lack of objective existence, well, first let's just establish the conventional truth, which means the appearances of things. Like things as we, not seeing them on an ultimate level, but just kind of everyday life phenomena. And you see, not only are we mistaken with regard to our sense of objective existence, etc., we make plenty of other mistakes when it comes to just conventional truth. Right? Just the ordinary conventional. We're so good in being mistaken about it. The ultimate truth we're mistaken about anyway. So about how the mind works, etc., that first needs to be established. Just to understand our anger, and I start pretty much, very soon I go right into anger. Okay? Because that motivates us to understand, wow, how these minds... So we are totally mistaken with regard to the conventional. So therefore, in answer to your question, it does not suggest that. Right? Because we've already mentioned it to some degree, like how in modern physics, it's already been established that the colors we see, for instance, that is only because of the light waves of the object. So actually, when we kind of ordinarily talk, we say the color appears to the eye, sense power, and that gives rise to the eye consciousness perceiving the color. But if you bring in modern physics, it becomes clear it's the light frequency that hits the retina, the cortex, and all that, right? And that then gives rise to an eye consciousness perceiving a particular color. Okay? So it's already in there. It must be subjective, because the color that I perceive is not out there. So how else then being objective? What else then being subjective? But it's too confusing, because we're not used to it. So try and understand the mind, plus that, impossible. Okay? So I'm glad you brought it up, because that's an important aspect. How are we with breaks? Are we still in...
Whenever you want. We end at 11:45. So
we end at 11:45. What's half of that? Someone good in math? Is that kind of half? We're 10:15. That's about half, right? Should we take 15 minutes?
Yeah.
All right. Let's take a break. And you can come forward and ask questions if you like. I'll be here for... But please try and make it 15 minutes. And do we have someone who could maybe take this thing outside and very gently... Is that not disturbing to the other people?
They'll be in their session. So
yeah,
just do it on the porch.
Just on the porch. So if anyone could volunteer to do this, to just give people the signal that 15 minutes are over. All right, thank you. 5 minutes before? Oh, yeah, like 2 minutes. 2 minutes before. Yeah. Oh,
we go from there. Just a clarification about the terms that we're using. So we have the perceived objects. You can say perceive, apprehend.
Great. All right. Let's continue. All right. Now, understanding the difference. Now, why are we so obsessed? Here we go into the Prasangika. Understanding the difference between the appearing object and the object of engagement is important in the context of explaining the Buddhist concept of the ultimate nature of all phenomena, that is, phenomena's lack of intrinsic or objective existence. Now, this is not your question before, was like, does that suggest objective existence? It's not exactly going into that. But, can you hear me? Oh, no, you can't hear me?
Still hear you though.
All right, I'll say it again. So, why, the part that I just read right now, well, why the part, so it needs to be louder?
No, it's good.
This is the max of it. There's a thing with this one, the mic has to be closer.
Okay, so I talk like that. Is that better?
And we'll try to find out the problem with this one.
Yeah, that's fine. Great. Thank you for taking care of that.
Probably the wire.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. All right, so why do we how is this understanding of the appearing object and the object of engagement, how is that important? In general, you just learn about this because it's important as part of the understanding of a consciousness in general. But then in particular, with regard to emptiness, it becomes important in a different way, or in another way. Okay? Why? Because taking the example of an I consciousness, what I have said so far, I didn't say that the subtle particles of the vase or the table, that they are the only appearing object. There's more. And just to give you a sense of something can appear that is known by the I consciousness, something can appear that is not known, and something can be known that doesn't appear. Okay, so all that is possible for an I consciousness. To understand those workings of the mind as a basis, that's why we talked about that. Now, usually, of course, you spend month and month on that until you're so familiar with that, it's second nature, and you don't mention emptiness. However, we don't have those month and month, so I might as well bring it in now, that hopefully it'll stick to some degree and you'll find it helpful. And some of it you've already heard, just maybe not in the context of the appearing object, the object of engagement. All right, so what is that? Again, taking the example of the I consciousness apprehending a vase. Okay, back to the vase or table, whatever. Although the I consciousness is a correct awareness, it's a correct mind, in that it incontrovertibly knows or realizes its object of engagement, the vase. So we take that example. We take an example of a mind that just happens to know vase. That's the example, all right? Now, of course, not every I consciousness knows vase, okay? But in this case, this is a particular case where the mind knows vase. Okay, now that I consciousness, apprehending vase, it's a correct awareness. We say it's a correct consciousness. Why? Because its main object is vase, and it knows vase. So it's correct, okay? What would be an example, and that comes later, of an incorrect mind? When your I consciousness sees
rabbit's horns.
the classic example, the horns of a rabbit. Okay? Why is this a classic example? I'm not talking about a rabbit that has ears and horns. I'm talking about an I consciousness that perceives the ears mistakenly as horns. Right? That believes, like, from far away, it sees those long ears and maybe one of them is kind of like bent over or something. And then the I consciousness mistakenly perceives those ears to be the horns of a rabbit. I don't know what was going on in Tibet at the time. How many people? It's the classic example, like horns of a rabbit. And I once got a postcard from someone in the US, in Wyoming or something. Where was that? There was this jackalope. It's called a jackalope.
New Mexico has them too.
All right. So those are these rabbits with but they're not. I think they're fake because they look like
fake,
antelope
they're
kind
like
of.
Photoshop.
Yeah.
They're Photoshop, right? It's like, there you go. There are the horns of a rabbit. It looks a bit like antelope kind of horn things. Anyway, so never mind. But it's like these classic things, horns of a rabbit. Some Westerners use the word flying cows. Oh, I'm so glad they're not flying cows. Can you imagine a pooing flying cow? You know, when a bird kind of hits you, but we go. So, get the umbrella out, flying cow. Anyway, so flying cow, that's another example. If you somehow, with your eye consciousness, maybe you're tripping, I don't know, you see, it could be, right? I mean, you're taking something and suddenly your eye consciousness sees it's possible because of drugs, etc. It affects your system, and you see the sense powers. The sense consciousnesses are affected by our body. That's important to know. It's the mental consciousness that doesn't necessarily need to be affected. But we're not saying that the sense consciousnesses are not affected by the brain, etc. This is really important, that distinction. Sense consciousnesses, yes, they are affected by our brain, by our all that. Mental consciousnesses don't have to. Okay? When I talked about meditators that can go beyond I was talking about mental consciousness, not sense consciousness. So sense consciousnesses are very much dependent on the substances in our body, etc. Which is why when we take a sleeping pill, the sense consciousnesses can no longer be active. They dissolve, which means you fall asleep. And once they fall asleep, a subtler mind arises. But that's indirectly. It's through the sense consciousnesses dissolving that the subtler mental consciousness becomes active. It is through the sense consciousnesses that the mental consciousness is affected. But it's not directly affected by the body. That's an important distinction. Now, when we take drugs, likewise, the sense consciousnesses, they start seeing things because of the chemical combination, whatever, of what we've taken. So you may see flying cows. That's an incorrect consciousness. That's incorrect because its main object is the flying cow, and that doesn't exist, or horns of a rabbit in that case. You don't have to trip to be able to see the horns of a rabbit. Of course, there are lots of other examples. Like, just look at the wheels of a car. They seem to be, if the car moves forward, the wheels seem to be moving in the opposite direction. Right? These optical illusions.
Sitting on a train.
Pardon?
Sitting on a train.
Sitting on a train.
Train next to you.
Oh yeah, that happened to me many times. I'd be like sitting in the train at a station, like in India, and so the other train started moving, and I was under the impression we were moving. Okay, great example. I mean, another one where, we're definitely, it's an incorrect consciousness. But here in this case, it's a correct consciousness in that example, because we specify it. An eye consciousness perceiving vase, and vase exists, right? If I were to say eye consciousness that perceives a pillar to be a vase, okay, there I obviously have a wrong consciousness. Or perceives, I don't know, a fake vase to be a vase. That's a wrong consciousness. But just the way I specify the example, eye consciousness perceiving vase, it's a correct mind. Because there's a vase and the mind perceives it. Okay. Now, that's a correct consciousness, but it is nonetheless mistaken with regard to its appearing object. So with regard to its object of apprehension or its object of engagement, which is the main object, it is a correct mind. But with regard to one of its appearing objects, one appearing aspect, not the vase itself, not with regard to the vase itself, but with the way the vase appears as existing in and of itself. The vase also appears as vase, so that is not with respect to that, it's not mistaken. But the vase also appears to exist over there, objectively over there. with regard to that, the mind is mistaken. So, what does it mean? It is nonetheless mistaken with regard to its appearing object, the vase's intrinsic nature, or intrinsic existence. Now, a lot of people have a hard time with the word intrinsic. They prefer the word objective or independent. But they're actually, it needs to be understood, they're not that different. So, when we say, for instance, objective, it means the same as independent and intrinsic. In which way? Assume that a vase, let's just assume hypothetically, a vase were to exist the way it appears. How does it appear? It seems that when we see a vase, we see it, that our eye consciousness is merely a looking glass into the world, as in, there's this object, it's really, the way it appears to me, that's how it really exists. It's got nothing to do with my mind. It's got nothing to do with my eye consciousness interpreting light waves in a certain way. No. It is actually blue or whatever is the color, golden or what have you. And because it has that color, that's why I perceive it. That's our mistaken perception, all right? And I said before, like modern physics contradicts that. Okay? But that is like, when we hear that, it's like, it sounds nice. But emotionally, it doesn't feel that way, right? It's only an intellectual kind of belief we have. If you have to write an exam on it, you can do that because you know all the facts, you memorize them. But you haven't internalized them. Just talking about modern physics. Is everyone aware of what I'm trying to say with colors? Okay, all that. I mean, we've all learned it in school, basically, I believe, right? We've all learned about light frequencies, that they're a certain length, and so therefore blue is seen as blue, red, and so forth. Longer frequencies, shorter ones, and so forth. Does that make sense? So, actually, what modern physics tells us is that the color that I perceive doesn't exist like that out there. Okay? Does it feel as if the color exists out there? Absolutely. It's blue and it's beautiful and I want it. Okay? There's no sense like, oh, that frequency is kind of nice. It doesn't feel that way. No, it's that color that appears to me and the object has that color and I want it. And if that is true in the case of color with regard to an object, it must be true for taste as well. That the taste that I experience doesn't exist within that object as such. It is the combination of many causes and conditions, including my sense, my tongue, my receptors and so forth, that I experience the unique taste of being sweet. Okay? And then I say the object is sweet. I label sweet. That's fine. Because what else would I label it? I don't label my tongue. But really, that sweetness, if the object were objectively sweet, then my tongue would not contribute to it. My receptors would not contribute to it. If the object were really blue in and of itself, it wouldn't need my eye consciousness, my brain and so forth to perceive it that way. It would be inherent. It would be in the object, within the object, intrinsically. That means if it's within the object, it doesn't depend on anything. It doesn't depend on my mind, etc. It's already in the object. Does that make sense? That is here the object we negate. That's the object we say is impossible, that intrinsic existence. But it appears to the mind like that. To our mind, that's how it seems. It seems the vase is over there, disconnected to my mind, right? Definitely not dependent on my mind to appear in the way in which it appears. No, we have a sense it appears to my mind because it exists in that way. Am I making sense? It appears to me because that's how it exists. And I perceive it the way it exists. And that comes along with beauty, for instance. Right? And when you listen to certain music, giving you the example not of an object such as a vase, listening to some music, and you think it's horrible music. Right? And you go, why do people like that? They're so weird. Having that sense, how weird do you have to be to like this music? Why? Because there's a sense, it's in and of itself horrible music. It's got nothing to do with my perception. No, this music is in and of itself, I don't know, non-melodious, makes me aggressive. It's aggressive music because I feel aggressive when I listen to it. I mean, honestly, I'm not a heavy metal fan. But I know there are lots of people who are. So my brother, he loves heavy metal, well, not any longer, but when he was younger, he was heavy metal all the time. So I listened to this and was like, whoa. It seemed like in and of himself that it was horrible music. And my brother would say, it calms me down. What? I don't know, it didn't have that effect on me. So I thought it was a non-calming music. Because it seemed to me like that. That was the label I gave it. And then I thought, because I gave it that label, and because of my instinctive sense it exists in and of itself, now, giving that label, now it seemed to be like that from its own side. You see, the problem is not with the labeling, and I'm not taking any questions now. Because this is tricky, talking about emptiness and not taking... If I start taking questions, it's a problem. But I want to get you that sense of how the thing now appears as if there was something in the object. Now, I'll give you another example, and many of you have heard use that example before. It's from one of my teachers. How this process works. He usually gives the example of a disciplinarian in a monastery. In the big monasteries, there's very strict discipline. Because 1,000 or more monks, without discipline, it'd be a disaster. So, they have a very strict discipline. You're not allowed to do this, that. You're not allowed to leave the premises and so forth for certain times. So, for instance, the monks, when they're younger, they like to watch movies at times, but they're only allowed on certain days to do so. So there's a disciplinarian, an elder monk, who's very highly regarded, very disciplined himself. He's appointed by the abbot to become the disciplinarian for a certain period of time, until his term's over and someone else takes on the job. And this person is scary, considered to be scary, right? Kind of bring forth in people a sense of fear. Not fear like, oh my God, I can't breathe kind of fear. No, but kind of respect and like, oh my God, how am I dressed? What am I doing? Right? There's a kind of respect and of course not wanting to be punished. Okay? Now this sounds really cruel, but it isn't like that. It's like a healthy sense of apprehension, a healthy sense of fear and respect. So, and these monks are usually really good ones, so they're never unfair. In most cases, they're not. So what I'm trying to say is that when initially a new disciplinarian is appointed by the abbot, people have no sense he's the disciplinarian. So you look at this person, and there's no sense, oh, disciplinarian, right? So you need to remind yourself, oh, you need to label now. Oh, he's the new disciplinarian. Oh, I have to be careful. He's the new disciplinarian. And then right away, okay, be careful. Okay, so you After a while, so you label. After a while, it seems that disciplinarian now has disciplinarian written on his forehead. Right? Because after you've labeled, and there's nothing wrong with labeling, what sets in is the sense that this person is intrinsically the disciplinarian. You no longer need to remind yourself, and now, because of our misperception, it appears, right? We don't need to think, okay? So even, I would claim to the I consciousness, disciplinarian, right? But intrinsically so. Not just that the disciplinarian appears, but... Okay, so after we've labeled Vas, the I consciousness can at some point, through the influence of the mental consciousness, perceive Vas. Likewise, through labeling long enough, that's a disciplinarian, long enough means a few times, it doesn't take much to get used to it. And then the I consciousness also has the appearance of disciplinarian, right? It appears as disciplinarian, but it appears that the person is a disciplinarian in and of himself. All right. How do we know that? Because when the term is over, he is relieved of his responsibilities, and another person is appointed. And so you see the ex-disciplinarian, and the monks go, huh? Right? Because it's still, that appearance is still left. As if in and of himself, this is the disciplinarian. You see, he is no longer the basis of labeling, the basis of imputation. As long as he was appointed, as long as it was his term, this disciplinarian, his body and mind, served as the basis for labeling disciplinarian. So conventionally, he was a disciplinarian. There was nothing found in his mind or body that accounts for him being a disciplinarian. It was not like he had a longer nose or whatever just because it was a disciplinarian. Nothing was found within the mind or body that qualified him being such. But nonetheless, because he was appointed, his body and mind became now the basis of imputation of a disciplinarian. It's a Tibetan word, Geku. But Geku. So anyway, the point is that he's labeled as a disciplinarian, and the moment someone else is appointed, therefore that's no longer a basis of imputation of a disciplinarian. But because we are not able to see things as disciplinarian and so forth, as like merely conventionally being such, we believe, after we label things, because of our innate sense of our innate misperception, misapprehension of reality, after the labeling, we add more to the person. Now, this is the disciplinarian in and of himself. Our mind does that automatically without us being aware of it. And so, even after the person is no longer a disciplinarian, due to the force of habit, it still seems there's something in that person that makes that person a disciplinarian. And we're all aware of that. Think of ex-president. I mean, Obama is the ex-president, and there's still something presidentness about him, right? Maybe some sadness. Never mind, that's different. But the point is, it seems, even with any new president, we take a while now. I know with Trump, this example is always funny, but with every new president, it takes a while to get a sense, oh, he's the president. We need to kind of right? And then after a while, it comes automatically. Maybe leave Trump out. With Obama, when Obama was president, that example worked great. So it's like, after a while, it's like, it seems he's in and of himself the president. Okay? Now this, if you recognize that in yourself, well, welcome your sense of inherent existence. As if in and of himself, this person is a president. In and of himself, this person is a disciplinarian, and so forth. Okay? Does that help a little bit, that idea? Okay, great. And so likewise, with our mind, for us inherent existence is ever present. If I label Vas, it's always inherently something. But then when I add the label Vas to it, initially I didn't know Vas. I had a sense of a shape and color, right? That I associated with that, like even as a child. Before I knew it was a Vas, I couldn't use the label. I didn't perceive it as Vas. Right? I mean, I'm not talking about the word itself, but what Vas refers to. Okay, we didn't know what that refers to, how it is used, etc. So at some point we do know, and the sense consciousness perceives it automatically. But no matter what the sense consciousness perceives now with this object, there's always a sense it is that, this, that, or the other, whatever it is, in and of itself. That's why emptiness is so difficult. Because it always appears to us. It always thinks whatever appears to your mind appears to exist in and of itself. So we have no idea what it means to be the opposite. That's why we struggle so much. Even when we think about emptiness, it appears inherently. And then it's really difficult to make sense of it. Because if it really existed inherently, there'd be all these contradictions. And all we come up with are all the contradictions. Because, yes, an inherent object that exists interdependently, it doesn't make sense. So we don't really understand when we talk about things are merely labeled. Because what we're thinking is an inherently existent thing is merely labeled. But an inherently existent thing is not merely labeled. So that's our difficulty. That's why it's so difficult. It's like, I use different examples. I use different examples. Like one example I used to use, I don't know it works that well, but for instance, if you have a problem with your eyes, and you're always, okay, this is a classic example, like floaters. It's called floaters. It's some disease where, I was able to explain it once, but now I forget. It's something about the liquid in your eye, and there's like some skin, I think, that gets loose, and it starts floating in your eyeball, and it gives you the appearance, the Tibetans say, of falling hair. But I guess it's like squiggles, kind of like little lines here and there, and whatever you look at, you see it with these squiggles. Okay, so you look around, and let's say if you have that condition, now most people, eye floaters, don't have that since birth, because I think it has to do with age, when whatever skin kind of gets loose and then it starts floating. But let's assume you've had it since birth. So you always see things with these squiggles in between, right? And now someone tells you, those squiggles are not supposed to be there, they're extra. You don't know what it feels like. I mean, I have no idea what they're talking about. What does it mean without these lines? It's like, that is normal. You can't even identify them. You don't know, because you see things, you do actually perceive things that are there, like a vase, etc. You perceive those, but plus the squiggles. So you don't know what is it, what is the aspect that exists, and what is the aspect that my mind is adding. You just don't know. And that is our difficulty. That is our difficulty, right? These squiggles on one hand versus what's really there. So we perceive vases, we perceive tables. There are vases and tables and so forth, because we call them that. So we're not mistaken with regard to seeing vases and tables, but we're mistaken with regard to them appearing as existing in and of themselves. That aspect, that characteristic that they don't have existing in and of themselves, we add. That's like the little lines. Okay? So that may help. Everything appears to us with these little squiggles. Everything appears to us as if existing inherently. Now, the eye consciousness that I described with the eye floaters, the example is a little limited because only your eye consciousness has that appearance. Your ear consciousness doesn't perceive squiggles because it's got nothing to do with your ears. Or your tongue consciousness, that is not affected by eye floaters, by that particular disease. Sometimes in the scriptures they call it cataract. It's not cataract. I looked it up. Cataract manifests differently. So the Tibetan word is rirab. Rirab doesn't mean cataract. It means eye floaters. Anyway, I googled this at some point to get a sense of what that means. So if you come across cataract in the scriptures, it actually is eye floaters. So that the appearance of falling hair, they say. Now, here the example falls short because it's only one consciousness that is affected by it. That is the eye consciousness. And of course, a mental consciousness that thinks about what appears to the eye consciousness. But other than that, the other awarenesses, the other sense consciousnesses are not affected. Plus the mental consciousness that is induced by sound is also not affected. Okay? With inherent existence, every mind is affected. To all your minds. To all sense and mental. All the different types of awareness have the appearance of inherent existence. So, that's why emptiness is so difficult. That's why emptiness is difficult. Okay? Is it clarification?
So is this all tantamount to be saying that the meanings of symbols or labels are in our minds, or is it the case that the meanings are out there in some sense?
No.
In the symbols, because
they're created by our mind. They're created by our mind. This is
the mind.
They depend on the mind. Yes, they come from the mind. So the meaning out there, there's no vase out there. There's nothing that you can point at out there and say, this is in and of itself a vase, without me calling it such. Right? You can do this with anything, It's a vase. In and of itself? No. It's a roundish object. In and of itself? No. It's a brown object. In and of itself, independent of something else? No. Right? I mean, just take simple things such as long and short. There it's most obvious. You see, we say, for something to be anything, it depends on so many other things. Definitely depends on the mind, But let's say the example that is oftentimes given also by one of my teachers, when you say someone is a woman, that is in relation to certain parts of the body that we say this person is a woman. She's a daughter, that is in relation to other people that are their parents. She's a wife, that is in relation to having taken, marriage vows or having gotten registered as husband and wife with another person, right? Another man, or maybe in the case of a woman being married to another woman, so being a wife. Then she is a mother in relation to a child. So there's nothing found in that person as such that makes this person a mother, right? No, it's in relation to something other than herself. If she existed inherently as a mother, as a daughter, as a wife, there'd be something found from the side of the object. It didn't depend on calling her mother in relation to this, that, and the other. Does that make sense? And that's the same for short and long. Everything is relative. It exists in relation to something else. In relation to these other objects, we then name it. And therefore we can say, due to this naming process, this is now conventionally a mother. But there's nothing in that. If I didn't label it in that way and didn't do so in relation to something, it would never be that. So in the end, I definitely need to apply that label. Someone needs to perceive it in that way. Right? Does that make sense? And that is so difficult. So is this long or is this short? Nothing. It's nothing. It's neither long nor short in and of itself. It's neither long nor short. You can't say anything. It is short in comparison to a broomstick. It is long in relation to a matchstick. Right? So is it long or short? No, it's nothing. There's no longness or shortness found in this object. But it seems to my mind, wow, this is long. Right? Somehow it may appear long. But why is it long? Only it's called long in relation to this. It's short in relation to that. If it existed the way it appears, I may somehow, because I'm used to those sticks and they're usually really short, and now this is longer than the ones I'm used to, for that reason I may perceive it as long. And my mind is automatically comparing it to a shorter type of those sticks. But it seems in and of itself, not in relation to this other, this is really long. Well, welcome to your sense of inherent existence. Right? And that goes further. This is not a problem. Sticks are not a problem. They're not much of a problem. When it comes to I and others, that's when it turns problematic. I'm really I, and you are always other. I. It's closest to my mind. My mind labels I in relation to this mind, right? This mind, in relation to this mind, I. It's the mind that does that. Labels I. And because you are further away from that mind, because the mind is here with this body, it's located somewhere. I said to you yesterday, our mind can't be anywhere because our mind is limited to our self-grasping. So it's with this body right now. And others, always further away. Right? So you're over there, and the suffering I experience, my mind experiences that. Therefore, my suffering is a problem. This is an I. This is more precious, and yours is less. And you're only important if you benefit this mind that grasps at an I. And look what are all the trouble that exists in this world because of that sense, I here, others there. That's not even the problem. But because I is here, it's a little bit more important. That's where the problem starts. I and others is not a problem. I can say I. I'm not I, actually. In and of itself, this is not I. Because it's only from the perspective in relation to this mind that I'm I. In relation to your mind, I'm other. So what am I? Am I or am I other? In relation to, like this one, is it long or is it short? Well, in relation to a matchstick, it's long. In relation to a broomstick, it is short. What about I? I'm not I in and of itself. This is not I. It's only in relation to my mind, this is I. In relation to Bianca's mind, I'm other. So in relation to her mind, she's more important. So who's more important? Right? So it's just a feeling like I'm more important, and that's where all the trouble starts. That's where all the trouble starts. And we're so obsessed with this I. This is also one of my teachers says this. Sorry, Kate and Dizzy, you've heard me say it so many thousand times. I'd be really bored if I heard myself hear it. I mean, it's easier to say it than to hear it. One of my teachers, what he also says is like, all day long, it's I. We are slaves of the mind thinking I. Have you ever noticed? Get up in the morning. I want coffee. I need a shower. And all the other minds and the body starts racing, getting that. Trying everything to satisfy that mind thinking I. Right? All day long. Mine. Where are my shoes? Where are mine? I don't like a spider next to my bed. I don't like the rain. I don't like this. I don't want, it's I, all day long. Have you noticed? It's like, we're really like slaves of the mind thinking I. So what my teacher says is this. If you recognize how we have no freedom, because there's this mind telling us I all the time, if we had to do the same thing for someone else without getting paid, like another person, I want, like this other person now, Peter wants this, Peter wants that, Peter wants this. We wouldn't make it longer than 2 weeks. And there we are, doing this our entire life. I. And it's like we're driven. We can't help it. Right? The stronger the sense, we cannot control it. It's there. We cannot stop it. So we can't stop it. Now we need to get this for the I. Right? There's no freedom. That's why we say there's no freedom. We're caught by the sense of this I all the time. Now that I better be there. My whole life I've been chasing after it. I've been concerned about it. It better be there. If then we discover that I has never existed, what a waste! Oh my gosh! And that is exactly this process. Once you realize that I'm not saying we don't exist, but when we think, I need this, that attachment never focuses on the realistic I. It always focuses on the made-up I. Some intrinsic, some inherent, some independent entity. Right? And it escapes we can't even notice it. It's like when we look at it, it slips away. Right? It's like, because it was never there. But nonetheless, because it kind of appears, kind of instinctively, very hazily appears, and since we never question it, we run along with it. All this time and energy we spend looking after any whim, any kind of need this, don't need this, I don't like, they don't like me, I need this, blah, blah. All this, all the time and energy, if we spend it towards enlightenment, we'd be enlightened long ago.
Why are we like
this? Yeah, that is my question. Why are we like this?
Why is water wet? Why is fire hot? It just is.
You said, Geshema, you said due to...
Okay, maybe we should actually start with questions now. But sorry to interrupt, because actually Bao, he had some questions yesterday, so let's hear those. We'll open it up to questions now, because I get a sense you still have lots of questions.
I'll cut to two, but before that...
Bo. Can we start with just one? Can you... I know you had 3 yesterdays, but only if you make them super short.
Yes, sure.
Okay.
So the first question concerns eye consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And this has reference to the analogy you gave of the lid and how eye consciousness differentiates between the lid and your hand and so on.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Now, let's imagine the lid is over there
Mm-hmm.
and you ask me to fetch it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I get up, I walk across, I stretch my hand, I grab the lid and get it for you.
Yes.
But we can also have a robot perform the same task exactly in the same way.
Yes, okay.
But when I look at the lid, I have a subjective, qualitative experience of, for instance, the whiteness of the white, which is qualitatively different from the blueness of the blue.
Okay, sure. All right, I get that.
Now, if a robot can perform the same task exactly in the same way, what
is the difference?
No, what is the the function that this qualitative aspect of my experience,
Mm-hmm.
which in philosophy is called the qualia, what function, what role this subjective qualitative aspect of my experience is playing? What is it allowing me to do? Because a robot or my zombie physical replica can also do this thing without having this qualitative experience.
Wait. The zombie gets a little difficult. Like, does the zombie go and fetch like a cup? I mean, like, the thing is, like, what is a zombie? So let's just leave the zombie out. We don't really know what zombies are. But let's take the robot, right? The robot. So the robot, it moves there, it picks up the object. So the robot seems to know. So I guess your question is like, what is different between my perception versus the robot?
No, that is clear.
Oh, that is clear. Okay.
The difference between me and a robot is when I look at the lip, I have subjective qualitative experience of the whiteness of the white.
An experience of, yes,
whereas
which
the
is...
robot
does
not have that experience.
So, okay, what is your question then?
And the question is, yet the robot is able to perform the task perfectly fine.
Yes.
Then what is the function or the role that that whiteness of the white is playing in my case?
Well, the thing is, like, what you described, the action of fetching the lid, first of all, is only the result. It's only the result of something that happened before. So in my case, having a certain shape and color and so forth, so I have labeled previously on the basis of mainly its function, and I guess also to a particular shape that is performed when you because of that shape you can use it as a lid. So in that case, I have learned to label that as a lid. I've labeled that mentally. That's the mental consciousness. So that mental consciousness, that labeling, now it affects my eye consciousness in what I see, and therefore the eye consciousness can actually, if you're familiar enough with this labeling, you can actually see lid now. So it's the color and the shape of that. Therefore, when I see those, my eye consciousness knows automatically, lit. Okay? Or when I see another person, their mind and body, the eye consciousness knows automatic, person. Because that's how I label. Okay? That's the difference. So there is a little bit of debate on that. Some people say the eye consciousness only knows shape and color. It doesn't know vase. It's the mental consciousness that does. But that's not the mainstream kind of assumption, and it needs to be analyzed. It seems that way, but I don't really agree. I think the eye consciousness can do more. It is on the basis of a certain basis of imputation, on the basis of which my mental consciousness is previously labeled. That process, I've become so familiar with, and since those work with each other, our sense consciousness and our mental consciousness, they coordinate with each other. When I'm miserable, colors don't appear as brightly because of my mental perception, right, to an eye consciousness, and so forth. So because of that, therefore, those two working with each other, my eye consciousness can now know lit. So it knows lit because of having labeled it in the way I described it. It knows lit. And then the mental consciousness sets in and says, oh, there's the lid. It is actually there. Now I need to fetch it. So actually picking it up with your hands, all that is the mental consciousness. But the perception, the fact that you perceive lit over there, due to the reasons I just described, that induces a mental consciousness giving the command, if you like, mental consciousness now, go and fetch, So your body goes into action and you fetch it. That's what happens. So that's a very sophisticated process in split seconds. There are a lot of mental events that take place, and we're just at the very beginning, kind of putting slow motion on eye consciousness, perceiving, right? Like I slowed it down. But in actuality, it's a very complex kind of process. And I bring in labeling right away. Usually it's not even mentioned. It's kind of like almost assuming things are in and of themselves, this, that, and the other. But the Prasangika wouldn't really be happy with that. In the Satantrika, when you study Lorig from the point of view of the Satantrika, you never bring in lack of objective existence. In fact, the Satantrika school believes in objective existence. So you go along with that. It makes it easier. It makes it easier. You don't even have to worry about objective. Now what you guys are doing, objective or not, right? automatically. If we had enough time, I wouldn't bother. I taught the same course long ago, many years ago. I had 2 months. I didn't mention objective existence, inherent existence. No. I just mentioned. So this is why you have an extra challenge, but I believe you walk away with more, which you wouldn't get. You would have to wait until you study the next course on emptiness. So I believe it's more challenging, but you get a fuller picture. So, sorry, I'm off a little bit, but I hope I answered your question.
But if I can, in principle, go about my life and the things that I do in my everyday life without sense consciousness, like a robot,
yes,
then what role, what function my sense consciousness is playing? How is it helping?
Feeling.
Feelings are not helping me perform this task in any way whatsoever.
Well, but this task is only possible because of your mental consciousness. Like I said, the sense consciousnesses just allow you to identify the thing, the lid.
No, the robot doesn't have mental consciousness.
No, he has another thing that does that. He has a computer program, right? Like, I don't know how robots work, but they're like computer programs that they can identify something. So you have something similar, but you don't have the feeling and you don't have all that, but there's something that has a similar function, and it enables the robot, and then whatever, I don't know how robots work, you would have to ask someone who knows how they work, but yeah, so there are similar functions, but of course the robot can never say, oh, what a beautiful lit, I enjoy that lit, I'm carrying it over, all that is missing, of
You would
course.
certainly program a robot to say that.
Say, but feel.
Yeah, exactly. So what is the function of feelings in me?
The function of feeling is to feel. What can I say? What is a feeling of happiness, right? You know what that feels like.
Empathy. Sorry, I'm interrupting. Is it empathy?
No, not always. I mean, just the feeling of being delighted to see this lit. I'm exaggerating with the lit. How delighted can you be? But maybe you've lost it, and because of all the different emotions that we're made of. I mean, it's. Think of your own experience. There's like a full. What's the word? Like. There's a full array, a full array of like thoughts and emotions and likes, dislike. I mean, like I said, I just gave you a very simple of it. I'm almost like I take a huge, beautiful painting, and I take out one square and explain that to you. And there's so much more. Think of your own experience. When I ask you, fetch the thing, right? And you may be unhappy about it, depending on how I say it. You may be pleased because of the way I say it. You may be pleased you can finally move after sitting forever on that chair. I mean, there's so much going on, right? So that's a much fuller experience versus a robot. There's no self-perception. There's self-awareness in your case. No self-awareness of a robot, though he claims there is, but don't trust a robot. I mean, saying there is, maybe one day. Okay, so people have asked this question, what about artificial intelligence? Right? Okay, I believe if scientists are really able to build whatever, a being, in such a way that it's close enough to a human mind, I believe someone can be reborn in that. And that is still a sentient being. That's a mind reborn into that. It's theoretically possible. If you just create the same kind of basis that allows the subtle wind and the mind to be active. So the subtle wind, that's most important. Because they connect the subtle energy on which the mind rides. They say it like the subtle energy is like a wind, like a horse on which the mind rides. Of course, not literally that the mind's like a rider or something, but it's just that analogy that is given. So they create this union, the two, the subtle energy and the mind. They create this union, and so if this energy is compatible with whatever has been built, you may have sentient beings that don't have a body that has arisen from our parents, but that was made by other humans. I don't have a problem with cloning, for example. I don't have a problem with cloning. I don't think you can clone Hitler. I mean, you can take his DNA, and then someone, right, let's assume cloning Hitler, well, it could be Mother Teresa taking rebirth in Hitler. So the physical basis, right? The physical basis. I'm talking from a Buddhist point of view. We're just thinking a person is defined by his body, but that's from a Buddhist point of view not true whatsoever. You can have identical twin. One is an extrovert, one is an introvert. One loves chocolate, the other one hates it. Very similar DNA and still very different character. So what I'm trying to say is, when you clone, let's say Hitler, let's say at the time we were able to, that's what people are scared of. Oh my God, one Hitler is bad enough, but 3? No, I don't think that necessarily. Whatever consciousness has a karmic connection, to whatever situation there, they'll be reborn in those 3 clones, right? And the original Hitler, well, it's Hitler, but those 3 others, they have a body that looks like him, maybe some tendencies that could be there because of the DNA, but that's also not given. You may have a certain DNA and be for a certain tendency, and that tendency never expresses itself, right? Because the mind that is reborn there doesn't have, needs to also bring something that allows for that tendency to come through, and if that is missing, it will never come through. So it'll just be another living being that just happens to look very similar to Hitler. And in fact, if that person's mind works in a certain way, the person will change. The external appearance will change. Right? I mean, even if you look like Hitler, you have that same DNA. Look at identical twins. They have the same DNA at the time of conception, and as they grow up, they change. I know personally a pair of twins, identical twins, Tibetan twins. When I met them, they were 8 years old. And so they were my classmates' relatives, and so they would stay with me, usually during our break, because they couldn't stay with my classmates, because they were a girl. And over the years, they would stay with me during their vacation, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years. They would look exactly the same. I never knew which one was Nima and which one was Droma. Never. Until they started changing. Now it's very obvious. I showed you the photograph, they look different. So, at some point they look the same, but I believe because their mind is different. Yeah, and I'm not saying it was not even one is beautiful, one is. Both are equally beautiful, but they look different. They have a slightly different face. I believe it's the mind that brings forth those changes. It affects the body. It affects the DNA has probably changed to some degree. There's constant change. We believed at once that the DNA always remains the same. Now we know better that the DNA actually changes, also in identical twins. The only time it's really identical is during conception. From then on, it starts already changing, right? So our DNA is changing. That's why these 2 identical twins, those 2, they look really the same. If I look at old pictures, I still can't tell them apart. Now at their age, now they're like 18, 19, now I can totally tell them apart. Am I making sense? So, all this, therefore, sorry, I've taken it really far from here, Bao, but it's just usually these are all questions that people ask, so might as well include them all. So, therefore, if you have that basis, if you have a certain basis and that's fully functioning, then you can have a living being even reborn into a robot. If you then ask me about that robot, like a very, very sophisticated robot, that's just like us. That's like, I mean, is the body? No, it's slightly different, but the mind operates in a very similar fashion. That's question number 1. Number 2?
So, I was wondering how the notions of sense consciousness, mental consciousness could have helped me in handling a patient a couple of years back. When I have time, I practice cognitive behavioral therapy, in which I have my background. So there's this person, completely normal, can read newspapers, talk politics, has job, family, and so on.
Yeah.
And now, but every time his mother came in front of him, he would say, "Who's this lady? She looks exactly like my mother, but she's an imposter." She's pretending to She's pretending to be my mother. And then when she goes away, and if she calls after an hour or so,
he believes the voice he recognizes.
So, what's going on in this case?
What's going on?
That's an old condition.
And this applies to females as well, I think.
Yes, I've heard of that. When you see them, you believe they're imposters. When you hear their voice, you believe it's that person. Yes. Let me think about it. I don't know. I need to think about it during the break. I need to read up on it. And then I don't know what's happening. My guess is maybe because of, you see, the eye consciousness may recognize mother, but the mental consciousness is more powerful. So the mental consciousness may say, well, that's not my mother. You see, your eye consciousness, you see your mirror image, it appears to be you, And still you don't scratch the nose over there. It appears to your eye consciousness to be, this is a classic wrong consciousness, although mentally, through our experience, we know this mirror image is not me. So we're not fooled by it. So if there's a mental condition, the eye consciousness is dominant, yes, of all the other sense consciousnesses, but when there's a very strong mental impetus saying, that's not my mother, for whatever reason that is, then the eye consciousness, even though providing the right information, it is overpowered, if you like, by the mental consciousness. So whatever caused that condition. So for some reason, it doesn't trigger the recognition in the mental consciousness as it would ordinarily do when you perceive that form. Only the voice does that. So the mental consciousness only responds to the audio, what do you call it, audio? Auditory. It only responds to the auditory input and doesn't do so with regard to the visual. So somehow the mental consciousness, so there is some problem, definitely. It's a mental problem, not a sense consciousness. There's no problem with the sense consciousness. That would maybe explain it, but I'm not sure.
It usually happens in people with dementia. But it can happen in young people sometimes.
It can. I've heard of that condition independent of dementia. It's just this bizarre thing that they think everyone they really know is an imposter. But when they speak on the phone, they're like, no, it's you. I saw a documentary about it and it was bizarre. So with dementia, that would explain it. That. Okay. Great. So it's the dementia that would explain there's already a disorder. But even without the dementia, it may be something else. But I need to read up on it and really try and understand it better. Okay. Great. Sorry, you've got 2 questions now. They did take a little longer. You'll have the opportunity again, Bao. Okay? Nikita, yeah, you're next.
So you said when we sleep, our sense consciousness is dissolved. So I want to understand what exactly happens when an alarm clock kind of switches on and it gets triggered. Mm-hmm. And just there was a clarification prior to this, which was... Sorry,
can I just ask, are you talking about when you're in deep sleep, but you hear your alarm clock?
Just when you're sleeping and then, so now my sense consciousness are dissolved, right?
Yes, that's a good question.
So what happens then?
Yes. I'll take it a little further. What happens when you start dreaming of the alarm clock? Like the alarm clock goes off, and you're not waking up, but in your dream you start thinking, oh, there's a fire because the fire alarm is going off. It's actually an alarm clock. How about that? Doesn't that contradict the explanation we gave that the eye consciousness has absorbed when we are asleep? First of all, how can we hear the alarm clock? And does the mental consciousness hear it? Because the mental consciousness is dreaming. That's an important question. Yes, that's one question. And Nikita?
And the second one is, it was based on a clarification about the intrinsic nature of things. We've always been discussing it in the form of how it appears to us right now. And I'm okay with that. I'm just very little, I won't say confused, but want to know when I'm manufacturing something.
Mm-hmm. Manufacturing means like literally making something?
Yeah, when I'm creating something. Just like example, this t-shirt.
Yes.
Right? I'm creating it with a concept or an idea of its color, its texture, which is in relation to example, maybe he doesn't see it exactly the same, but there's an essence of an intention that is put behind its creation.
Yes, absolutely.
So what happens there where in like a Pond's ad or whatever, anything, everybody kind of, say 80% of the world sees it as its intrinsic nature of what I've created.
Yes. Oh, I'm not sure I understood that question. Okay, let me answer the first one. All right, the second one anyway, we'll get to that. I hope the parts that I did understand, and so I wasn't so sure about what you meant. But anyway, the first question, that's a good question, and it comes up quite a bit. First of all, when we're asleep, the sense consciousnesses are not active. Right? They're not there. If they're not there, how can someone kind of like shaking you to wake you up, which would be a body consciousness picking up on that, how can you actually notice that with a body consciousness at some point? Usually not right away. You know, it's not like you touch them and they wake up. Usually it doesn't happen. But after a while, you wake up. Or the sun, bright light being shown into your eyes and you wake up. Or noise, of course. Noise like such as someone shouting or the alarm clock going off. How can you actually wake up? If there's no ear consciousness. So the mental consciousness doesn't pick up on that. Very important question. Secondly, than the phenomenon I explained before. Without actually waking up, it becomes part of your dream. So it's like that seems to suggest that the mental consciousness does actually pick it up because it becomes part of your dream. So I asked the same question when we studied this topic as part of our study. I asked one of my teachers, Geshe Thupten Palsang. I asked the same question, and he answered this. And I thought it was a really amazing answer, because he has such an amazing way. He's this unique meditator. A lot of the times I cite him. I've actually taught courses where I thought he might as well be here because I just cited him. He's really amazing. He just say a little bit about him. He's a great meditator, but he's also so intelligent. And he was like in Drepung Monastery. He was educated there. When he debates, everyone grows silent, like in a group debate, because everyone wants to hear what he's got to say. He's got this unique way of thinking about things. And he's extremely humble. He never took like a fancy Geshe degree. He took the smallest. He was not well, he was sick, and he didn't care about the title. So he never, in terms of like worldly titles, had any title. But His Holiness always wants him to sit near him. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama, when he saw him in the crowd, he said, like, sit up here, next to you. And so next time he said again in the crowd, His Holiness saw it, he said, come up here. So it took 3 or 4 times, His Holiness, because he was always too shy to be up there, too humble. And now he's sitting actually near His Holiness. All I'm trying to say is that His Holiness really knows his qualities. So he's so humble and so kind. And he has these unique ways of thinking about things. So I asked that question. He was friends with one of my teachers, who was my class teacher. And he happened to be in his room one day. And so I asked him. And he said, actually, what happens is, with the what do you call it? The sense powers. The sense power, of course, is activated. It's a strong stimulus. For instance, the sound, the alarm clock. It's pressure waves, right? Basically hitting the sense power, like as in like the ear. There's a strong impetus, and that actually wakes up. It's such a strong impetus that it makes the person arise. This is usually at times when the deep sleep period is over. I mean, I've slept through my alarm clock. Everyone else was awake. And then eventually they were like, 2 hours of that alarm clock. And I didn't hear it. Everyone else was awake, right? So I slept through it. It was not... even though my ear consciousness, all that happened. Like the eardrum was affected, blah, blah. But it never affected... my deep sleep, my sleep was so deep that it couldn't trigger the ear consciousness. Now, usually the alarm clock goes off at a time when we usually get up anyway, right? Oftentimes. And so our mind is no longer in that deep sleep state. We've already caught up on deep sleep, which I explained at a different time why we need it from a Buddhist point of view. So, therefore... the mind, it's not as deep any longer. The sense consciousness is not as subtle. And so this impetus from the outside can very easily give rise to the sense consciousnesses. It's really the sense powers wake up, induce a sense consciousness, and due to that, if it induces that, the subtle mind can no longer remain, it becomes coarse. Okay? As I said, with the sleeping pill, it's the other way around. The sleeping pill... it does something to the sense consciousnesses that they dissolve, and therefore the mental consciousness automatically becomes subtler. Here, this is the reverse process. Okay. Now, then, with regard to the question, how does it become part of the dream? Geshe Thupten Palsang, what he said was, you wake up for a short moment and fall asleep right away again. And it's that short moment when you're out and your ear consciousness hears it, that becomes part of your dream. And you woke up and you go in. Wake up, go in. It's this in, out. And that after he told me that, I pay attention to that. And I have that before I wake up. I shortly wake up, fall asleep. Shortly wake up, fall asleep. Open my eyes. I do that a lot until I finally get myself to wake up, right? So, or until the alarm clock goes off. Now, just before I wake up, I have these moments, and it makes total sense that if there's a strong sound or whatever, or someone doing something, that you actually bring it back into your dream. Because the lighter you sleep, the more likely you have a dream. So oftentimes my most vivid dreams are just before waking up, because my mind is not in such a deep state. So no wonder I may integrate it, wake up quickly, hear it back. That totally explains it to me. Does that make sense?
It's impossible to make it a dream if you do not have the split second of waking up.
Yes, because you must have picked it up. I mean, it's the sound of the alarm. Unless you remember it from yesterday's. The dream is about the alarm clock and you just happen to dream about it at the same time as it actually happens to go off. It could be that as well. But otherwise, your mental consciousness cannot perceive, if it's only the mental consciousness, it cannot perceive a sound.
So how does the alarm clock then function? How does it wake us up?
Well, it's the ear sense power. It activates the sense power. And the sense power is the cause for the ear consciousness. So it triggers the ear consciousness. Our sense powers, right? They trigger the ear consciousnesses.
So they are inactive when we see.
Yes, because they become activated. They become active.
The sense power is not asleep.
That's right. Yes, very good.
Okay.
Yes. Very good. That's it. The sense powers, they're always there.
Sense powers.
Yeah.
Sense consciousness.
So I just wanted to know, in the same thing, when we can program our minds to wake up at a specific time, are we programming our mental consciousness or our sense consciousness?
Mental consciousness. That's very good. This shows us the power of the mind. When you want to wake up at a certain time, this is why bodhicitta is so effective. You're setting your mind to become enlightened. It's like setting your alarm clock. Instead of saying, I'm going to wake up at 5 o'clock, you're saying, when all my actions that I engage in now become the cause for me to become enlightened. And then they become. Beautiful example. I love that. Very good example. So the example of you set your mind, okay, and that reminds me of something. Someone shared with me yesterday. So we talked about the ability of the mind. First of all, setting the mind, a motivation. This takes me right into how important our motivation is. Because you can make things happen if you it's a setting of a motivation, really. So that's why when we wake up in the morning, we set our motivation for the day to make the day most meaningful. It's like setting your inner alarm clock. That's the mental consciousness. That's why we make prayers. Prayers are this. It's just that. That's how prayer works. You pray for something. You ask other beings for assistance as you go into a doctor's office and you ask the doctor to assist you. You ask other beings that we cannot perceive but are still around us. We ask them for assistance. But mainly you set your own mind. May I be able to do this well? May I be able to And depending on how virtuous it is, etc., these dreams actually, these wishes can actually come true. It takes a while. Right? Also with the alarm clock, it's not like every time you set your inner alarm clock you wake up. I know from my own experience. Or I stay awake the whole night or I wake up every hour because I think it's time to get up. Alright? But in general, this is how prayer works. But I'm also thinking, so therefore we can direct our own mind. It proves that. But unrelated to that, I also talked a lot about our ability of the mind to just know. And I spoke about some of the meditators, they're so in touch with their own body and their own mind. They know things that we usually don't know. But this person, she told me that, and that may be possible because of having done meditation, but even if that's not the case, due to some imprint or some intuitive ability, she knew when she had breast cancer. She knew when she had breast cancer, and she went to a doctor and they didn't believe her. They didn't believe her, and they checked, and first they did an ultrasound, they didn't find anything, and she just kept insisting until eventually they with a cup, I think they probably did a biopsy, do you call that? And they investigated that, and then it turned out that, yes, she had cancer, breast cancer, and of course early enough discovered, so how do you know that? But in this case, right, it's not like you just think you have it and then you just happen to be right. I don't think so. I think we can actually know things. Our mind has that ability. But we may just think, I'm just being silly or something. Sometimes we are being silly. I wouldn't trust it in my case. I wouldn't trust it. Because sometimes I think I know and I'm right. And sometimes I think I know and I'm not right. So it's almost like I was just lucky in that moment. I was just guessing and I guessed right. I don't have that ability, but I know other people who do. And that just shows this is the ability of our mind to know. To know just anything. Right? Anyway, okay, great. What time? We have to leave?
We've got 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes, great. Someone who hasn't said that much. Yes.
I'd like to ask.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that there is a concept of, when you're meditating and you activate part of your mind to look at your mind.
That one. To watch your own mind. Are you actually activating? If you watch your own mind, how do you do that? If you watch the mind that you observe, is it the same mind that looks at itself? Actually, no, that's not possible. That's actually not possible. I mean, there are some debates on that. Some would disagree. But the problem is, how does that work? If you, let's say I'm angry. And my mind is focusing on the person I'm angry with. For that mind to look at the anger, you can't look at the mind itself and the mind itself looking at the anger. It's either or. Either you focus on the person you're angry with or you focus on the mind itself. Okay? So first of all, that's why the anger dissipates usually. When you focus on the anger, then what you're focusing, your direction is now, your attention is now directed towards the mind itself, so you lose the previous object. So it was there a moment earlier. I think it's through memory. Like the moment you start paying attention to the mind, the other object disappears, but it's still fresh there. It was just a second ago that you were angry, and that is enough focusing on it to perceive that. Okay, but I don't think you can do it simultaneously. You cannot simultaneously have the mind, for instance, you cannot have a mental consciousness thinking of blue, and that same mind also looking at itself being blue. It's perceiving blue. In the lower schools, not the Prasangika school, they talk about something that's called a self-knower. They say, and I didn't want to mention that because it's, again, Prasangika, but I might as well do it in this context. They say there is actually a part of the mind that looks at itself and part of the mind that looks outwards. But it's kind of a crutch. You see, a lot of the lower philosophical systems, they were taught by the Buddha. They teach certain ideas that logically don't make sense and that the highest philosophical school discards. It discards them, it refutes them. But for the time being, they're helpful to accept them because they explain certain things that are different. If you didn't have those crutches, those ideas, it would be very difficult to fully understand the working of the mind. However, once you learn, usually these are like stepping stones to the highest view. Once you get familiar with the self-knower, why do they explain it? They say, like, how do we know we know? I know not only blue, but I also know that I saw blue. What accounts for... So, for me to remember blue tomorrow, I must have had a mind today that perceives blue. But not only do I remember blue, I also remember I saw blue. So I must have had another mind that was aware of me seeing blue. Okay? So that's the reason for saying, that's the reason for the philosophers of this system, and that was taught by the Buddha himself, for us to understand the final working of the mind as a stepping stone or as a crutch, a temporary crutch. So the Buddha taught this, so this philosophical system, they say it's because of that self-knower. But later on, once your mind is familiar with the working of the mind, you realize, well, even if that self-knower didn't exist, you would still know I saw. You would still know that. So then, the highest philosophical school, they come to the conclusion, first of all, it's unrealistic. One part of the mind looks at itself, and that mind doesn't work like that. And secondly, it's not necessary. So once you move on to the next philosophical school, having become familiar with this other school, it's no longer there. So therefore, in the Prasangika school, they don't talk about a self-knower. If you remember blue, you know by implication that you saw blue. How else would you remember blue? We just know that if I remember blue, I must have seen it. And we're not always sure. Sometimes we don't know whether we saw it or someone talked about it. If there was always a self-knower, we would know that in all cases. Number one. The next thing is about watching your own mind. All right? So I just addressed the self-knower that is accepted in the lower schools, but not in the highest Prasangika school. But we still have minds like a introspection. How does that work? How does introspection work? So it cannot happen at the same time, the way I described it. You need to let go, and then you just remember the moment before. And the other option would be you have a second mental consciousness that observes the mind of anger. But again, the moment you observe the anger, it goes away. They don't exist at the same time. So the moment you pay attention to the mind, the object of anger is lost. So you can never have them simultaneously. So I don't even know it's necessary to have a second mind. Or you switch back and forth very quickly and just not aware of it. That's also possible. You think of blue, observe the mind thinking blue. Think of blue. So it goes back and forth so quickly, you may think it exists at the same time. Similar to when you turn, they use the firebrand. You have a stick with a burning fire and you move it very quickly. You think that the fire is in the same place at the same time. It seems to be simultaneously in the same place because you see the circle, right? Well, that is similar to minds very quickly switching back and forth. Because they switch so quickly, it gives us the impression that they happen at the same time. But you're actually just switching back and forth very quickly. Okay? So, therefore, I don't think it's another part of the mind like the self-knower, as it's explained in the lower schools, but rather that you may have one mind that, because of your intention, you have the intention to look at the own mind, look at the object, look at the mind, it switches back and forth, which, since you do it fast enough, you can actually pick up on what's happening with the mind. That's what you do in meditation. Right? When you watch your own mind, right? You allow thoughts to arise, and then you pay attention to them. So it's through the force of them just being there, you perceive them. They were there a moment earlier. It's through your memory that you actually perceive them. What else is breathing? What is breathing meditation, actually? How does that work? Which sense consciousnesses are active when you do the breathing meditation? Are there any? Is there only mental consciousness? When you do the breathing meditation, is only the mental consciousness active or not? Whoa! 48. Thinking 75 people in front of you. Anyway, that's for the break. Which ones are active when you do breathing meditation? And how does that work as a type of homework? All right. And now, start observing your own mind. Please pay attention. Be ready now. Watch your sense consciousnesses. Watch. Okay? Try to be as mindful as you can, because you're going to have a lot of sense consciousnesses during lunch and probably after. So this is your homework, until the discussion group, you do that, please. Try and remember. And tell me what you found out. Okay, anyway, Joy, please go first. Topic, I'll discuss it with Jomala.